They found it first, long before Columbus, a land rich with resources untouched by European hands. The Vikings landed in North America around the year 1000 AD, but then, they disappeared. No grand Viking empire, no lasting settlements, just a few ruins and sagas that whisper of what could have been. So, why did the Vikings fail to colonize America? The truth is more shocking than you think. Most people believe that European colonization of the Americas began with Columbus in 1492, but nearly 500 years earlier, Viking explorers, led by Leif Erikson, set foot on what we now call Canada. They called it Vinland, a place of wild grapes, fertile land, and endless potential. Yet within a few short years, they were gone. Was it hostile natives, a lack of numbers, harsh winters, or something even more unexpected? In this deep dive, we're uncovering the real reasons why the Vikings failed to make America theirs. The Vikings were some of history's most fearless explorers. They built settlements across Iceland and Greenland, conquered parts of England, and even traded as far as the Middle East. So why couldn't they hold on to North America? Some might say it was just bad luck. Others argue they were doomed from the start. But the truth is a mix of brutal realities, ones that turned their American dream into a nightmare. Vinland, a land too good to be true? When Leif Erikson and his crew first landed, they saw a paradise. Fertile land, mild summers, and wild grapes. They built houses, explored, and even tried to trade. But was Vinland really the paradise they thought? The reality of the land. Unlike Greenland, which was cold and barren, Vinland seemed rich and inviting, but the farther south they went, the more the landscape changed. Thick forests made travel difficult. The terrain wasn't suited for their usual farming methods, and without large open pastures, their livestock struggled. Climate challenges. The Vikings thrived in cold but predictable environments. North America had unpredictable weather patterns, harsh winters, humid summers, and storms they weren't prepared for. The Native American factor, the Skraelings strike back. The Norse called them Skraelings, believed to be the ancestors of the Inuit and indigenous tribes like the Beothuk. At first, there were attempts at trade, but things quickly turned violent. Skirmishes and ambushes. The Vikings were great warriors, but they were used to fighting people with similar tactics. The indigenous people knew the land, moved swiftly, and used weapons the Norse weren't familiar with. Numbers game, there were simply too many natives and too few Vikings. Even their best fighters couldn't hold back wave after wave of resistance. Fear factor. Viking sagas describe warriors gripped by fear, something rare in their history. Facing an enemy that didn't fight like them in a land they barely understood was a recipe for disaster. Isolation and lack of support. Unlike later European colonizers who had steady supplies from their home countries, the Vikings had no backup. Their settlements in Greenland were barely surviving. Iceland was too far. Norway was distracted with its own wars. No reinforcements. If a settlement in America failed, there was no second wave of colonists to replace them. Long and dangerous voyages. Viking ships were built for speed, not cargo. Crossing the Atlantic with enough supplies was risky. Communication breakdown. Messages took months, even years, to reach Scandinavia. By the time help was requested, it was often too late. The Greenland problem, a struggling colony. Greenland, the closest Viking settlement, was barely holding on. Resources were scarce, farming was tough, and when climate shifts made things even worse, there were simply no extra people or supplies to send to Vinland. Cold snap, a mini ice age hit around this time, making farming even harder in Greenland. Internal conflicts. Viking society was plagued with feuds and power struggles. Expanding to America wasn't a priority when their own colonies were struggling to survive. Cultural limitations, the Viking mindset. The Vikings were warriors, not empire builders. Unlike the Spanish or English who came centuries later, they didn't have the same systems for large-scale colonization. No centralized leadership, Viking society was decentralized, with chieftains leading small groups rather than a single king planning colonization efforts. Plunder versus settlement. They were raiders at heart. Establishing long-term colonies took patience and planning, something Viking culture didn't emphasize. No written strategy. Without detailed maps, records, or government support, expansion was haphazard at best. The final nail in the coffin came when the Vikings made a chilling realization. Vinland wasn't worth the fight. Between relentless native resistance, brutal winters, isolation from their homeland, and struggling Greenland settlements, the dream of a Viking America faded. One by one, they abandoned their settlements, their presence disappearing into history. But what if things had gone differently? If the Vikings had stayed, North America's history could have been completely rewritten. Imagine a world where Norse culture mixed with indigenous civilizations centuries before the British and Spanish arrived. But history had other plans. So why did the Vikings fail to colonize North America? It wasn't just one reason, it was a perfect storm of challenges: hostile natives, harsh environments, supply shortages, and cultural limitations. The Vikings were some of history's greatest explorers, but even they had limits. And that's the real story of the Viking failure in America. Not just bad luck, but a clash of worlds they simply weren't ready for. Want to hear more untold stories of history? Hit subscribe and keep watching.